Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People's Story. After years of saving, I finally purchased a charming 3-bedroom house in what seemed like a peaceful suburban neighborhood. The previous owner mentioned nothing about an active homeowners association during our discussions or closing. My real estate agent said something about an old HOA that hadn't been active for years, but assured me it was a non-issue. I poured my heart, soul, and savings into renovating this place. I installed solar panels to reduce my carbon footprint and save on electricity. I painted the house a warm terracotta color that complemented the landscaping I designed with drought-resistant plants and a small vegetable garden in the backyard. I even built a pergola for outdoor dining that became my pride and joy. All in all, I spent nearly $30,000 on improvements within the first 4 months. Life was perfect until about 6 months after moving in, when I found an official-looking notice taped to my front door. The letter claimed I was in violation of multiple HOA regulations. According to this mystery HOA, my solar panels were installed without proper approval, my house color wasn't on their approved palette, and my garden structures exceeded height limitations. They demanded I rectify these issues within 30 days or face fines totaling $4,500. I was stunned. Where was this HOA when I bought the house? When I was doing renovations? The letter was signed by someone with the title HOA President, but included no contact information besides a P.O. box. My first call was to my real estate agent, who seemed as confused as I was. "That's strange," she told me. During the title search, there was documentation of an HOA that was formed in the 1990s, but it appeared to have been dormant for at least a decade. No dues had been collected, no meetings held. Next, I spoke with some neighbors. Most were as surprised as I was about this sudden HOA resurrection. One elderly neighbor who had lived there for 20 years laughed when I showed her the letter. "Oh, that must be the work of those folks from the North End," she explained. "A small group has been talking about bringing back the old association, but as far as I know, only 3 or 4 houses are involved. Most of us never agreed to restart anything. I learned the board had appointed themselves to leadership positions without any neighborhood-wide vote or proper notification. Something felt very wrong about this situation, and I wasn't about to tear down my carefully planned improvements based on the demands of what seemed like a power-hungry group of neighbors. I decided to attend their next meeting, which was mentioned in small print at the bottom of the violation notice. It was scheduled for the following week at the self-appointed president's house. When I arrived, I found just 5 people sitting around a dining room table with notepads and serious expressions. I introduced myself and politely asked to see the HOA bylaws, documentation of its current legal status, and minutes from the meeting where they had reactivated the association. The woman at the head of the table, who I presumed was the president, looked at me like I had asked for state secrets. "We don't need to provide that information to residents in violation," she said dismissively. "You purchased property in our jurisdiction, and you're required to comply with our standards." I kept my cool. "Actually, I'd like to understand when the HOA was reactivated, since it wasn't disclosed during my purchase." A man with a meticulously trimmed mustache scoffed. "It doesn't matter what you knew when you bought the house. You're under our jurisdiction now." I asked how many homeowners in the neighborhood were actively participating in this HOA. The room grew uncomfortably quiet before the president reluctantly admitted only 7 out of 42 homes had representatives at their revival meeting. I left feeling frustrated, but determined to get to the bottom of this. I had a college friend who worked as a paralegal in a real estate law firm, and I called her that evening. She advised me to request all HOA documents through certified mail and to conduct my own research at the county records office. For the next 2 weeks, the harassment intensified. I received 2 more notices, each with increased fine amounts. Once, I spotted the mustached man taking pictures of my house from the sidewalk. Another board member approached me while I was gardening to remind me of the violations. The stress began affecting my sleep and enjoyment of my new home. My research at the county records office proved illuminating. I discovered the original HOA had indeed been legally dissolved 12 years ago when it failed to file required annual reports for 3 consecutive years. Under state law, it had been administratively dissolved, and no proper steps had been taken to reinstate it. The so-called revival meeting had no legal standing. I took this information to a real estate attorney who confirmed my findings. For a $350 consultation fee, she explained that not only was the HOA defunct, but attempting to collect fines under such circumstances could constitute fraud. Rather than immediately confronting them, I followed my attorney's advice and built a systematic case. I documented every communication, photographed the notices, recorded the dates and times of their unwanted visits, and compiled all my research on the HOA legal status. I requested certified copies of the administrative dissolution from the state. During this time, I received a notice that they intended to place a lien on my property for unpaid fines, which now totaled over $7,000. This was the last straw. With my attorney's help, I drafted a formal cease and desist letter outlining the facts. The HOA had been legally dissolved years ago, had not been properly reinstated according to state law, and had no authority to impose rules or collect fines. We stated that any further attempts to enforce non-existent regulations or place liens would result in legal action against them as individuals for harassment and fraudulent misrepresentation. The letter was delivered via certified mail to each of the 5 board members. I also filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding their fraudulent activities. The response was quick, but not what I expected. Instead of backing down, the HOA president left a voicemail threatening to make things difficult for me if I didn't comply. Little did she know I had been recording all communications as advised by my attorney. 2 days later, I received notice of an emergency HOA meeting to address my hostile actions against the community. I attended with my attorney, who began the meeting by introducing herself and informing everyone present that she would be recording the proceedings with their implied consent by remaining in the room. The atmosphere changed immediately. Several homeowners I hadn't met before were there, looking confused about the whole situation. My attorney calmly presented the facts: the HOA legal dissolution years ago, the improper revival without following state procedures, and the illegality of attempting to enforce rules or collect fines under these circumstances. She projected documents on a screen showing the official state records of dissolution and explained that not only were their actions without legal basis, but they potentially constituted fraud, harassment, and misrepresentation that could expose the individual board members to personal liability. My client has been patient and reasonable, she concluded, but the harassment stops today, or we will file suit against each board member individually. The room fell silent. One of the homeowners who wasn't on the board asked to see the dissolution documentation again, then turned to the president. "You told us the HOA was always active. Did you know it was dissolved?" The president's face flushed. The mustached man muttered something about maintaining neighborhood standards before abruptly leaving. 2 other board members looked genuinely shocked, suggesting they hadn't been fully informed about the HOA legal status. That meeting effectively ended their reign of terror. My attorney followed up with a settlement offer. They would retract all violation notices and fines, send written apologies to all homeowners they had harassed, and reimburse my legal fees of $1,800. In exchange, I would not pursue further legal action. They accepted within 48 hours. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. Several neighbors approached me about forming a legitimate neighborhood association focused on community events rather than restrictive rules. We held a properly noticed meeting where over 30 homeowners attended, established bylaws that required 75% participation for any rule changes, and created a community improvement fund that was completely voluntary. The former HOA president and mustached man put their houses on the market within 3 months. As for me, I completed a new landscaping project featuring a colorful butterfly garden that would have violated at least 3 of their arbitrary rules. Every time I sit under my pergola and watch butterflies visit my garden, I'm reminded that standing up for what's right sometimes requires patience, preparation, and perseverance. I've made wonderful friends in the neighborhood now, and we've established a community that supports each other rather than polices minor details. The elderly neighbor who first told me about the self-appointed HOA has become a close friend, and she often joins me for coffee under my non-compliant pergola. I learned valuable lessons about home ownership, property rights, and the importance of doing thorough research. But most importantly, I discovered that sometimes teaching someone a lesson isn't about revenge. It's about setting things right for everyone involved. The next one is an entitled People's Story. My wife and I moved into our modest suburban home about 3 years ago. We were thrilled to finally have a place to call our own after years of apartment living. The neighborhood seemed nice enough, mostly quiet families and retirees who kept to themselves. Everyone was friendly in that wave when you see each other getting the mail kind of way, but we weren't having block parties or anything. Shortly after we moved in, I developed a bit of a hobby collecting garden gnomes. I know it sounds silly, but it started when my wife bought me one as a joke for my birthday. I named him Gerald and placed him proudly in our front garden. Gerald looked so lonely out there by himself that I decided he needed some friends. Over time, my collection grew to about 15 gnomes, all carefully arranged throughout our front yard. I'd position them thoughtfully, creating little scenes, a gnome fishing in the bird bath, another pushing a wheelbarrow near the flower bed, that sort of thing. Most of our neighbors seemed amused by my growing gnome family. Some even commented that they enjoyed seeing what new positions the gnomes would be in each week. Yes, I occasionally moved them around for fun. The neighborhood kids especially loved them, often stopping by to point out their favorites, but not everyone appreciated my quirky hobby. Enter my neighbor from 3 doors down. I'll just call her Karen. From the moment she first walked past our house and saw my gnome collection, I could tell she wasn't a fan. She'd wrinkle her nose and mutter something under her breath. At the time, I just shrugged it off. Not everyone has to like garden gnomes, right? About 6 months after we moved in, Karen approached me while I was setting up a new gnome addition. A little guy with a red hat holding a lantern. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "Don't you think those things are a bit tacky?" I looked up from positioning my new gnome. "They're just garden decorations. My wife and I enjoy them." "Well, they're bringing down property values in this neighborhood," she said, crossing her arms. "Several people have commented on how childish they look." "I'm sorry you feel that way," I replied, trying to remain civil. "But they're on my property, and I like them." She let out an exaggerated sigh. "We have standards in this neighborhood. Maybe you should consider something more mature for your landscaping." Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and strutted away. I just shook my head and went back to adjusting my gnome. This was my first real interaction with Karen, but unfortunately, it wouldn't be my last. Over the next few months, Karen made several more comments about my gnomes whenever she passed by. She'd make a point to walk slowly in front of our house, shaking her head disapprovingly. Once, I even caught her taking photos of my front yard while scowling. By this point, I was getting annoyed with her behavior, but I wasn't about to get rid of something that brought me and many others joy just because one person didn't approve. After a particularly frustrating day at work, I came home to find my wife looking upset. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me that Karen had approached her that afternoon. She told me I should control my husband's childish obsessions and that we were embarrassing ourselves, my wife said, clearly bothered. She said the neighborhood association was considering sending us a formal complaint. This made my blood boil. One thing was Karen sharing her unwanted opinions with me, but involving my wife and making her uncomfortable crossed a line. Plus, our neighborhood didn't even have an official HOA, just an informal community group that organized block parties and the annual yard sale. They certainly had no authority to police lawn decorations. "Don't worry about it," I assured my wife. "She's just trying to intimidate us. She has no actual power here." Still, the encounter left me feeling uneasy. I decided it might be a good idea to install some security cameras around our property. I'd been thinking about it anyway for general security, but now I had an additional reason. The following weekend, I installed 4 cameras, one facing the street, one covering the front yard, one at the side of the house, and one overlooking the backyard. As it turned out, this was one of the best decisions I've ever made. About 2 weeks after installing the cameras, I received an alert on my phone while at work. The front yard camera had detected motion. I opened the app, expecting to see a package delivery or maybe a neighbor walking their dog past our house. Instead, I was shocked to see Karen marching straight up our front walkway, headed for one of my gnomes. I watched in disbelief as she bent down and picked up Gerald, my original gnome. She looked around furtively before shoving him into her oversized purse and hurrying back toward the sidewalk. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This woman was actually stealing my property. I immediately called my wife to tell her what had happened, then left work early to file a police report. I had clear video evidence of Karen trespassing and stealing from us. The officer who took my report seemed amused by the situation, but assured me they would take it seriously. The next day, Karen returned home to find 2 police officers waiting for her. They explained that they had video evidence of her stealing my gnome and asked her to return it. According to the officers who later updated me, Karen turned bright red and initially tried to deny everything. When they mentioned the video, she changed her story, claiming she was just removing an eyesore for the good of the neighborhood. Eventually, she reluctantly retrieved Gerald from her garage and handed him over. I thought that would be the end of it. Karen had been caught, embarrassed, and forced to return my property. Surely she would keep her distance now, right? Wrong. A few nights later, I received another alert from my security cameras. This time, it was 11:30 p.m., well after most of the neighborhood had gone to bed. The footage showed Karen creeping across my lawn with what looked like a garbage bag in her hands. She was clearly trying to be stealthy, hunched over and looking around constantly. I watched in real time as she began collecting my gnomes one by one and shoving them into her bag. She was trying to steal my entire collection. I immediately called the police and then, still watching the feed, decided to take matters into my own hands. I turned on all the exterior lights at once and opened the front door. Karen froze like a deer in headlights, halfway bent over one of my gnomes, her bag already bulging with several others. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my voice probably waking up half the block. Karen straightened up quickly, dropping the bag with a clunk as several gnome hats poked out from the top. "I'm performing a community service," she said haughtily, as if she had every right to be on my property at nearly midnight. "These hideous things are an embarrassment to the entire neighborhood. I've had multiple complaints." "The only one complaining is you, Karen," I said, stepping onto my porch. "And this is the second time you've tried to steal my property. The police are already on their way." Her face paled slightly at that, but she stood her ground. "You're overreacting. These are just cheap lawn ornaments." "They're my lawn ornaments on my property," I countered. "And you're trespassing. Again." "Fine," she huffed, giving the bag a kick. "Take your precious gnomes, but don't think this is over." She stormed off just as the police car pulled up. I explained what had happened and showed them the security footage. They took a report, but said that since she had left the gnomes behind this time, there wasn't much more they could do except warn her to stay off my property. After this incident, I decided to be proactive. I printed several still images from my security footage showing Karen trespassing and stealing, along with copies of both police reports. I then delivered these to everyone on our street with a brief note explaining that if they saw this woman on my property, they should call the police immediately. It was perhaps a bit dramatic, but I was fed up with her entitled behavior. Most of my neighbors were sympathetic. A few even shared their own Karen stories. Apparently, I wasn't the first person she had harassed over lawn decorations. One elderly couple told me she had repeatedly complained about their bird feeders attracting vermin, aka songbirds, to the neighborhood. For almost a month after my flyer campaign, Karen seemed to be keeping her distance. I occasionally saw her walking on the opposite side of the street, shooting daggers at my house with her eyes, but she made no attempt to approach. I allowed myself to hope that perhaps she had finally gotten the message. Then came the incident that would change everything. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was inside watching a game on TV while my wife was out shopping. My phone buzzed with a security alert, and I opened it to see Karen once again on my property. This time, she wasn't going for the gnomes. Instead, she was taking photos of my house from various angles, occasionally scribbling something in a small notebook. I sighed, paused the game, and headed outside to confront her. "Karen," I called as I stepped onto my porch, "you need to leave. You're trespassing again." She jumped, clearly not expecting to be caught. "I'm documenting code violations," she said defensively, holding up her notebook. "The gutters on your house are sagging, your mailbox is non-regulation, and these things," she gestured at my gnomes, "are creating a hazardous environment." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. "There are no code violations here, and even if there were, you're not a code enforcement officer. You're just a neighbor who can't mind her own business." "We'll see about that," she snapped, taking one last photo before turning to leave. As she marched across my lawn toward the street, her foot caught on something. One of my gnomes, a little fellow I called Winston, who was partially hidden by some decorative grasses. Karen let out a surprised yelp as she lost her balance, stumbled forward a few steps, and then fell face first onto the sidewalk. I rushed over, genuinely concerned despite our history. "Are you okay?" I asked, offering a hand to help her up. She swatted my hand away, her face contorted with rage and pain. "You did this on purpose!" she screeched. "You put that thing there to trip me!" "The gnome has been in that same spot for months," I said calmly. "And you wouldn't have tripped on it if you weren't on my property without permission. Again." Karen struggled to her feet, wincing as she put weight on her right ankle. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," she spat. "You can't just leave traps for people in your yard." "It's not a trap, it's a garden decoration," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "And you're trespassing, which I have on video. Again." She limped away, still hurling threats about lawsuits and negligence. I went back inside, rewound the security footage, and watched the incident again. The video clearly showed Karen wandering around my yard uninvited, then tripping over Winston, who was in plain view. He wasn't hidden or placed in a walkway. She had simply not been watching where she was going while trespassing on my property. I saved the footage, figuring it might come in handy if she actually followed through on her threat to sue. Part of me doubted she would. Surely no lawyer would take such a ridiculous case, right? I was wrong. 3 weeks later, I was served with a lawsuit. Karen was suing me for medical expenses, pain and suffering, and emotional distress, claiming that I had negligently created hazardous conditions on my property with my excessive and improperly placed lawn ornaments. According to the court documents, she was claiming that she had been invited onto the property to discuss neighborhood concerns, and that I had maliciously placed a hard object partially concealed by vegetation with the intent to cause harm. She claimed to have suffered a sprained ankle, bruised ribs, and facial abrasions requiring medical attention. She was asking for $75,000 in damages. I nearly choked when I saw the amount. This was beyond ridiculous. I immediately called my homeowner's insurance company to report the lawsuit. They assigned an adjuster who came out to inspect my property and review the security footage. After seeing the video of Karen clearly trespassing and then tripping over an obviously placed garden gnome, the adjuster actually chuckled. "This is one of the most frivolous lawsuits I've seen," he told me. "Don't worry, we'll assign you an attorney and fight this all the way." True to their word, the insurance company provided a lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, who specialized in homeowner liability cases. After reviewing all the evidence, including the multiple police reports about Karen's previous trespassing and the security footage, Linda was confident we could not only get the case dismissed, but potentially countersue for legal fees and harassment. The weeks leading up to our court date were stressful. Karen seemed to be enjoying my discomfort, making a point to drive by my house slowly and smirk whenever she saw me outside. She had even started telling other neighbors that she was going to take me for everything I had, and that I would have to sell my house to pay her settlement. A few neighbors warned me about her comments, concerned about the escalating situation. Finally, the day of our first court appearance arrived. Karen showed up with her arm in a fake-looking sling, which hadn't been mentioned in any of her medical claims, and walking with an exaggerated limp. She was accompanied by a slick-looking lawyer who seemed like he'd stepped right out of a late-night TV commercial. Our lawyer, Linda, remained completely professional but couldn't quite hide her amusement at the theatrics. The judge, an older man with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, reviewed the initial filings and then asked both sides to present their preliminary evidence. Karen's lawyer went first, painting a dramatic picture of his poor client who had been viciously injured by the defendant's negligence. He showed photos of Karen's injuries, some minor scrapes and bruises, and medical bills from an urgent care visit. He claimed that Karen had been invited onto the property to discuss important neighborhood matters, and that I had created unsafe conditions with my excessive and poorly placed decorations. When it was our turn, Linda calmly stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, before I present our evidence, I'd like to clarify one critical point. The plaintiff was not invited onto my client's property. In fact, she has a documented history of trespassing at this residence." She then proceeded to present the police reports detailing Karen's previous attempts to steal my gnomes, followed by statements from neighbors who had witnessed her harassment. Finally, she played the security footage from the day of the incident. The courtroom fell silent as everyone watched Karen clearly trespassing on my property, taking photos and making notes, then tripping over a gnome that was in plain view before falling on the public sidewalk. The footage also captured our brief conversation afterward, including her threat to sue me. When the video ended, the judge peered over his glasses at Karen and her lawyer. "Counselor, would you care to explain why your client claimed she was invited onto the defendant's property when this video clearly shows otherwise?" Karen's lawyer looked uncomfortable. "Your Honor, my client believed she had implied permission to, after being reported to the police twice for trespassing on the same property," the judge interrupted, his voice heavy with skepticism. "And can you explain why the injuries appear to be significantly less severe than what's claimed in your filing?" The lawyer stammered something about the injuries worsening later, but it was clear the judge wasn't buying it. "I've seen enough," the judge said. "This case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm inclined to grant the defendant's motion for recovery of legal fees, as this appears to be a frivolous lawsuit filed in bad faith." Karen let out a gasp of indignation, her fake sling suddenly forgotten as she pointed an accusing finger at me. "He deliberately set a trap for me. Those gnomes are a public menace." "Miss Karen," the judge said sternly, "I suggest you remain silent before you make your situation worse. You are clearly trespassing on private property after having been warned multiple times to stay away. The defendant's lawn decorations are irrelevant. You had no legal right to be on his property in the first place." He then turned to her lawyer. "Counselor, I expect better from members of the bar. You should have vetted this case more thoroughly before filing. I'm ordering you to pay the defendant's reasonable legal fees in this matter. We're adjourned." And just like that, it was over. Karen stormed out of the courtroom, miraculously cured of her limp, while her lawyer shuffled papers dejectedly. Linda shook my hand with a smile. Congratulations, that went even better than I expected. The judge clearly saw through her act immediately. Relief washed over me. Thank you for everything. I can't believe she actually thought she could win this. People like her count on others being intimidated and settling just to avoid the hassle, Linda explained. She probably expected your insurance company to offer her a few $1,000s to make her go away. She didn't count on the security footage or your detailed documentation of her previous behavior. As we left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The case was dismissed. Karen would get nothing and her lawyer would have to pay my legal fees. It was a complete victory. When I got home, I placed Winston the gnome, the unwitting hero of this story, in a position of honor right in the center of my front garden. I even added a little sign next to him that read, "Trespassers beware." Perhaps a bit petty, but after what I'd been through, I felt entitled to a small celebration. For the next few weeks, Karen avoided my house entirely, crossing to the other side of the street whenever she had to pass by. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was telling people the judge was biased and that she was planning to appeal, but nothing ever came of it. About a month after the court case, I received a letter from the neighborhood community group, the non-HOA that Karen had tried to use against me. They were writing to apologize for any harassment I had experienced and to assure me that Karen did not speak for them in any official capacity. They also mentioned that they had asked her to step down from her self-appointed role as neighborhood standards coordinator, a position that, as far as anyone could tell, she had simply made up. These days, my gnome collection continues to bring joy to me, my wife, and most of our neighbors. I've even added a few new members to the family. As for Karen, she eventually sold her house and moved away, presumably to terrorize some other neighborhood with her entitled behavior and baseless threats. The whole experience taught me several valuable lessons. 1. Always document everything. 2. Security cameras are worth every penny. 3. Standing up to bullies might be stressful, but it's ultimately satisfying. And most importantly, 4. Never underestimate the power of a garden gnome named Winston. The next one is a pro-revenge story. So this happened about 1.5 years ago, but I recently heard the news on how far my revenge went. I was a Navy enlisted service member and was stationed in Yokosuka, Japan for a few years before I got transferred back stateside. I worked in the main hospital that cared for service members and their beneficiaries. It's a small hospital, so everyone knows everyone. Shortly after I left, I caught wind of a new physician officer working in the radiology department. My friends would say he's horrible to work with, but that's nothing new. However, someone saw him print a letter, and he left it on his desk and took a picture of it and sent it to me. He's requesting to move from enlisted housing to officer. Edit. Found out it's not a private letter. He did actually send it to housing, and most of housing is ran by enlisted members. For context, military housing is available for those who are married, have a family, or are qualified based on their rank and depending on the military base itself. Typically, officer housing is much nicer than the enlisted. In Yokosuka, housing is basically the same all around because it's overseas. But most of the housing are apartments, and each apartment complex is called a tower. Example, Fuji Tower. There are 9 towers and 2 are for officers, since enlisted members outnumber officers by a lot. Now, one thing about the military crap happens. When getting stationed, it is the active duty member's responsibility to either apply for housing on or off base before arriving, depending on what is allowed. If there is limited space and you don't apply for housing on time, then you get put where there is space. So our new officer got placed in an enlisted tower. Mind you, enlisted members have families of their own, and other officers have been placed in enlisted housing before without an issue. Here are some quotes in his letter. And yes, this guy has a PhD. I have many valid objections to living in a building of almost all enlisted, and even many lower enlisted being an officer. There's a lot of crime, violent actions, drug use, and alcoholism that happen in enlisted housing. There are also sexual assaults and other perverts. I have a good-looking family, a wife and 2 daughters aged 3 and 4. They are prime targets to be victims for these enlisted deviant activities. My family should be safe in housing that is with officers. Officers are much more respectable, and these types of deviant activities are incredibly rare compared to the deviant activities of enlisted being commonplace. Other officer families will not want to visit us because our family lives on enlisted housing. My children need to make friends with other officer children. My wife needs to make friends with other officers' wives. I need to make friends with other officers. Forcing an officer to live in a large apartment building with almost all enlisted is unethical. You get the idea, so this guy basically looks down on all enlisted service members, assuming every single one are drug users, perverts, pedos, criminals, etc. The kicker? He was an enlisted Army member before going to officer school. In civilian terms, think of a manager that discriminates and calls all of his subordinates criminals, violent, alcoholics, pervs, drug users, etc. based on your job position, forgetting that some have a family and, maybe aren't any of those things. And he not only have the authority to ruin your work life, he can ruin your personal life. Deny days off, make you stay late, write you up if he doesn't like you and not letting you promote. Safe to say, everyone was pissed and I have nothing to lose. I was separating soon and figure I'd have some fun before I get out. I created a burner Facebook account and posted the letter and the officer's picture on a popular military enlisted group page. Within 2 days, it spread like wildfire, but I wasn't done yet. The military has something called challenge coins. Think of trading cards but custom coins that come in many shapes and sizes. I designed one with his face and a big middle finger in the back. On top of that, I designed stickers to show how proud us deviants are. Other coin designs came from other people as well, but so far I think mine was more popular. I sold over 70 coins to the initial person who originally sent me the picture at a huge discounted price so she can sell them for a profit for herself. So the officer's face is everywhere because most people keep their coins displayed on their desk. No matter where the officer went at work, he would see his face on someone's desk. And since it didn't have his name on the coin, can't officially say it's him, I sold more stateside and even some got sent to Europe. I made about $3,000 overall, which was nice. The story even got featured on the online naval newspaper and on 2 popular YouTube channels. And if you're military, the only time big military care is when it's too big to sweep under the rug. This story got the officer sent up to captain's mast, which is like Navy court. He tried to say his wife was the one that wrote the letter, but no one is buying it because her writing style is way worse. She even tried to take the fall, but no one believed her. They both ended up deleting all social media. Due to this, he got served 3 UCMJ articles, which basically are his offenses. But there's more. When you're in the military, you have a deadline on how long you can be a certain rank. If you don't pick up, then you're kicked out. And because he's new and got served UCMJ articles, he won't be up for promotion and therefore was involuntarily separated. Also, the officer program he went through pays for his PhD. When the military pays for your PhD, you have to serve 10 years to pay them back. If you don't complete 10 years, you have to pay the military back with money instead of time. So he lost his job and now has to pay back the military for his PhD. And since it takes a while for the paperwork to have him and his family sent back stateside, you can bet he socially suffered because no one worked with him. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.